Writing with co-authors is common among research teams. As a co-author, you've likely had to juggle tight timelines, busy schedules, different working styles, clashing personalities, and inefficient processes. And these challenges can lead to a lot of tension and even conflict among your team. So in this video, I'm going to share 5 strategies for writing collaboratively with your colleagues, and the last one will likely surprise you. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. And since 2011, I've helped scientists, clinicians, and other professional writers master the craft of writing so they can write with intention and maximize their impact in their field. So what are the benefits of collaborative writing? Collaborative writing gives you the opportunity to blend complementary strengths among your research team. And so with these complementary strengths, you can generate new ideas, gain new perspectives, and learn new skills. And with collaborative writing, you can also share the workload of what can often be a really large writing project. Collaborative writing is also a great way to build trust and camaraderie among your team so that you can build lasting professional relationships with your co-authors. So these are just some of the benefits of collaborative writing. And let's get into the 5 strategies that will help you maximize these benefits. The first strategy is to create a schedule. Now, many authors will categorize the entire writing process under the umbrella of writing. But writing actually involves many steps, and if you break the writing into those different steps, it makes it a lot easier to schedule time to accomplish those tasks. So if you think of writing as researching, outlining, drafting, revising, proofing, and submitting, and the other various little tasks in between, it can help you break things up into chunks to make the goals a little bit smaller and seem more attainable, and also to really plan an efficient writing process and schedule for your team. And when you are creating the schedule, you want to consider other factors that may not be related to the actual writing itself. So, for example, you need to consider the project due date, but not just the external due date, such as a grant agency's due date. You also need to consider any internal due dates. So a lot of grants offices, for example, will require that investigators send their grant to them 2 days or even a week before the grant is actually due. So you want to make sure that you build in those details into your schedule. Other things you might want to consider are the working styles of the different members of your team. So some people are early birds or day larks or night owls. And so understanding the different personalities in your team can help you to maximize that schedule. So as an example, I'm a day lark or even an early bird. And so I can work really well with someone who might be a night owl. And so if we stagger the way that we work, we can really collaborate efficiently to complete a project. Now, when you're creating your schedule, you also want to consider any other competing priorities, such as teaching or mentoring or traveling to a conference or vacation or maybe family activities. You want to consider all of these things when building out the schedule. And the other thing that I recommend is to build in a buffer. Things come up, problems arise, you get sick, a different challenge comes up, something happens. And so building in a buffer can help you to account for anything that might come up. So one thing that I do is I always build in a 20% buffer in the timeline of my project. And that way, if for some reason I get sick, I'm not set behind on getting the project out the door. And if you have a really long project, you might consider building in those 20% buffers in between at certain intervals so that you can account for anything that might come up without having to shift out all of the different tasks within the timeline that you need to complete. And so creating the schedule that works well for your team is really going to make the writing process a lot faster and easier. So the second strategy is that you want to choose a project leader or manager. And so this person really serves as the project manager for this particular writing project. And so they help to manage the project timeline and keep people accountable for what they need to accomplish within that timeline. This person also helps to keep the team up to date on everything that's going on, including scheduling meetings and running the meetings. They might also be responsible for combining drafted sections of the document and then revising it to make sure that it has one voice, and they might even proofread the document before it gets submitted. Now, if this person is the corresponding author, they might also coordinate with the editor or agency, and so this would include submitting the document and following up on anything that might need to be followed up on. And so choosing a strong leader that can manage all of these details can help to streamline the writing process and keep everyone on the team on track to meet its goal. The third strategy is to maintain version control of the documents. So organizing things will save your team so much time and energy. And so when you are first planning a writing project, you want to meet with your team and you want to agree on the storage location for the documents, whether it's on a certain type of cloud software or a shared drive that your organization might support, like SharePoint or Dropbox or Box. And then you want to also agree on a folder structure so that everyone knows where to find things within the location that you're saving all of the files. And then in addition to the folder structure, you also want to agree on a naming convention that everybody follows. And you can choose whatever convention works best for your team. But things that I recommend avoiding are to include the word final in your naming convention. I can tell you many times when I've received a document when it was the final version. But I can only imagine how those authors felt as they were going through those final revisions. As another option, I would actually recommend not including the version number. I've definitely received a few documents where it was version 65, and so I can only imagine how those authors felt with every iteration of that manuscript. So the convention that I like to use is I will start with the date organized by year, month, day, and that way all the files are automatically organized by the last date that they were worked on, and so that new date becomes the new version. And then I have the same name that I use for the document. I have a main name for the document, and then sub-documents or sections have an additional name next to that. And so that helps me easily track the latest version, the overall document or project it applies to, and then the specific document or section that it might be. So you can find something that works well for your team. Just make sure that everyone is on board with the convention that you use. So maintaining this version control is so helpful for finding things when you need them, and it can even help you to avoid some of the negative feelings that can arise when you see certain naming conventions like final, or version 76. The fourth strategy is to choose the writing method. There are many different ways to write a document collaboratively, but you need to choose the best way for your team and for the particular project that you are working on. So, for example, one way that you might write the document collaboratively is through layering. And so in this process, you have one person who writes the entire draft, and then the co-authors review that draft. Or you might write a document through combining. And this is where the author team meets and agrees on an outline, and then each author writes a particular section of the draft that then the project lead will combine all of these sections together and then read through the entire draft to make sure it has one voice before circulating it for revisions. And then another way that you might write collaboratively is through stitching. And this is really similar to combining, except rather than breaking up the document by section, you break it up by paragraph. And then the project lead is responsible for stitching together those pieces and then reading through the draft to make sure it has one voice and then circulating it to the authors for revisions. Now, there are pros and cons to each of these methods, which I can get into in another video, but the key is to choose or create the best process for your team and for the particular project. Now, the fifth strategy is to review in series, and this one will likely surprise you, because I have met many authors who will review in parallel. So let me explain the difference between these two strategies. So in parallel, what happens is the project lead takes the same document and sends it to all of the co-authors at the same time. They all review it at the same time and all send their comments back to the project lead to incorporate. But in series, what happens is the project lead takes the document, sends it to the first co-author, that co-author reviews it, sends it to the next co-author, that co-author reviews it, they send it to the next co-author, and so on, and then it goes back to the project lead. Now, this surprises many people because they often have this mindset of, well, if we work on the project at the same time in parallel, then we'll get it done faster. But actually, when you work in parallel, it creates more inefficient, repetitive, and delayed work. Because what happens is that the leader then has to incorporate all the different edits from all of these authors from all these different documents. And they have to keep track of where the draft is with all of these authors. So they have to check in with all of the authors. Now, it's not just the leader that this is inefficient for, it's actually not ideal for the entire team. Because what can happen is if your team members are all reviewing the same document, they might make the same duplicate edits as the other co-authors. But if the first author had caught that before it went to the next author, it would save time for that next author. So while the first author might have a little bit of a heavier load, it's going to make it much lighter for the team overall because it's going to be less work for the second author and then the third author and then so on. Now, the other challenge with reviewing in parallel is that the different authors may not be reviewing the latest draft if somehow something happened along the way. Or it could also be that the authors are editing behind each other. Now, this often happens when reviewing in cloud software where you have the ability to be in the document at the same time. And so the problem with this is that, let's say I'm reviewing the document and I'm on the third page, and then a different author comes in and starts on the first page and they start making changes. Any of those changes they make can affect everything else in the document. And so it's really important to make sure that one person is in the document at a time. So if you are using cloud software, be sure to lock it while you're editing it or have an agreement with your team that you're going to download it and work on it and then upload it. And then you can avoid that process from happening. Now, another problem with reviewing in parallel is that you do not know the status of the project because everyone has it and the project lead is keeping track of where everyone is at, but might not be keeping everyone in the loop. So that can also create some challenges in the team. Now, when you review in series, there are so many benefits. So it's more efficient, it saves time, it saves effort, and that's because the leader will not have to combine revisions from all these different drafts because one draft will be circulated and then they will have all of the author's comments in one draft that they can then address. But this isn't beneficial for only the leader, it's also beneficial for the team members because they will not make duplicate revisions. They also can layer their edits on top of each other. They can query other members if they have questions or there are certain things that they need to address. They can also see edits made by other members, and so they can comment on whether they might do something differently, if they agree with what the author did, or they can add queries for other authors to address. Also, they will know who has the latest draft. So they'll know that it went from author 1 to author 2 to author 3, and they'll know where it is in the process. Now, oftentimes I'll hear from people, oh, but if author 2 is waiting on author 1, and then we don't know when it's going to be done. And so what I recommend, if you want to make this really efficient, is you sit down with your team and you plan out the series process. And you can consider people's schedules for this process so that you say, okay, we want to have everyone review this document within this particular week. Author 1 is going to review it on Monday and send it to author 2. Author 2 is going to agree to review it on Tuesday, and then they're going to send it to author 3. And then author 3 is going to review it on Wednesday, and then so on. And so if you get everyone to commit to these timelines up front, you can have a really efficient process, and you can maximize all of the benefits of reviewing a document in series rather than in parallel. So reviewing in series with a systematic process that your team establishes that can work well for them is a great way to make the revision process so much faster and easier and collaborative for everyone on the team. So those are 5 strategies to write collaboratively with your colleagues. If any of these strategies are new to your team, you might hit a few bumps along the way, just like if you were learning anything new. But when you find the right process for your team and you fine-tune it for the project, the writing process will be so much faster and easier, and you will build stronger relationships with your team that are on a foundation of trust and collaboration. And I'd love to know any strategies that you found helpful when writing with your teammates. Be sure to add them to the comments so that we can all help each other learn effective ways to collaborate. And if you liked the strategies that I shared in this video, you might also like this one about a strategy for planning authorship decisions before and during the writing process so you can avoid any authorship issues. And if there's something in particular that you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments. I create these videos for you, so I want to make sure that I'm creating something that you will find valuable. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day, and I hope to see you in the next video.